Have you ever checked into a hotel room and felt like you weren't alone? That feeling of 1,000 strangers having slept in the same bed, walked on the same carpet, looked out the same window. It's a strange intimacy with ghosts you'll never meet. Hotels are temporary places, in-between places. And sometimes, in those quiet, anonymous rooms, the things that get left behind aren't just forgotten phone chargers or a single sock. Sometimes it's a story, a memory, or something much, much darker. Tonight we're going to be checking into some of those stories. So turn down the lights, get comfortable, and whatever you do, don't listen to this alone. These are 4 creepy true hotel horror stories you shouldn't hear alone.
This happened to me about 3 years ago. I was in my final year of college, driving from my campus in Oregon back home to Utah for Thanksgiving break. It's a long drive, about 12 hours, and I was trying to do it all in one go to save money. But around 1 in the morning, somewhere in the vast, empty darkness of Nevada, my eyelids started feeling like they had weights attached to them. My head would nod for a second, and the car would drift. I knew I had to stop. I pulled up the map on my phone, but service was spotty. There was nothing for miles, just a long, straight ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the black. I kept driving for another 20 minutes, my windows down with freezing air blasting my face to stay awake. That's when I saw it, a single flickering neon sign off the highway. It read, "The Sleepy Hollow Inn, vacancy." It looked like something straight out of a horror movie. A long single-story building with maybe 10 rooms, a small office at the front, and a parking lot filled with more weeds than cars. Only one other vehicle was there, a beat-up-looking pickup truck. Against my better judgment, I pulled in. The exhaustion was just too much. I told myself it was just for a few hours, just enough sleep to get me home safely. The office door creaked open with a little bell. The man behind the counter was old, with skin like worn leather and pale, watery eyes that seemed to look right through me. He didn't say much, just grunted when I asked for a room. He slid a tarnished brass key across the counter. "Room 7. "Just you tonight?" he asked, his voice raspy, like he hadn't used it in a while. "Yeah, just me," I said. "Just passing through." He nodded slowly. "Room next to you, number 8, is empty. The whole wing is, so it'll be quiet for you." I thanked him and headed out. The air was dead silent. No crickets, no wind, just a profound, empty quiet that felt heavy. My room was what you'd expect. The carpet was a questionable shade of brown, the air smelled of dust and stale cigarettes, and the bedspread had a floral pattern that was probably stylish 40 years ago. But all I cared about was the bed. I didn't even bother to change. I just locked the deadbolt, threw my duffel bag on a chair, and collapsed onto the lumpy mattress. I fell asleep almost instantly. But it wasn't a restful sleep. I kept drifting in and out of strange dreams. And then a sound pulled me fully awake. Scrape. Drag. Scrape. It was coming from the room next door, room 8, the one the old man said was empty. I sat up in bed, my heart starting to pound. My eyes darted to the clock on the bedside table, 3:14 a.m. The sound came again. It sounded like someone was dragging a heavy piece of furniture across a wooden floor, but the floor in my room was carpeted. I held my breath, listening. Silence. I told myself I was just overtired, hearing things. The building was old buildings make noises. I tried to lie back down, closing my eyes, but I was wide awake now. Every little creak of the building made me jump. And then I heard it again. A different sound this time. A soft, rhythmic tapping. Tap. 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 It was coming from the shared wall between my room and room 8. It was faint, but it was unmistakably there. It sounded like a finger tapping gently on the drywall. My blood ran cold. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The tapping stopped.
The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. I strained my ears, listening for anything. A footstep, a cough, a television. Nothing. Just the low hum of the ancient mini-fridge in the corner of my room. Maybe it's the guy from the pickup truck, I thought. Maybe the clerk made a mistake and rented that room out after all. It was a logical explanation, but it didn't make me feel any better. There was something about the sounds. They felt secretive, wrong. I spent the next hour sitting up in bed, staring at the wall, waiting. Nothing happened. Slowly, my rational mind started to take over again. It was probably nothing. I was just spooked by the creepy motel. I finally managed to convince myself to lie back down. I needed to sleep. I was just starting to drift off when a new sound shot me upright, my heart leaping into my throat. It was a voice, a woman's voice, muffled by the wall. She was whispering, but her words were frantic, desperate. I couldn't make out what she was saying, just the terrified tone. It sounded like she was crying, pleading. Then I heard a man's voice. It was low and guttural, angry. I couldn't understand his words either, but the menace in his tone was crystal clear. There was a thump against the wall, and the woman let out a small, choked cry. Then silence. I was completely frozen. This wasn't just an old building creaking. This was real. Someone in that room was in trouble. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone on the nightstand. I had to call the police. I fumbled with it, my thumb slipping on the screen. No service. Of course, the motel's Wi-Fi was a joke. It wouldn't even connect. My mind raced. What could I do? Go to the office? What if the old man was involved? That pickup truck, what if it belonged to the man in that room? I was alone out here, miles from anywhere. The fear was paralyzing. But then I heard the woman's cry in my head again. I couldn't just lie there and do nothing. My plan was to get in my car and drive until I got a signal to call 911. I crept out of bed, my feet silent on the gross carpet. I grabbed my keys and my wallet, stuffing them in my pocket. I didn't care about my bag, I just had to get out. I moved towards the door, my eyes fixed on the deadbolt. As my hand reached for the lock, I heard a sound that stopped me dead. Click. It wasn't from room 8. It was from my door, the lock. It had just been turned from the outside. I stared at the deadbolt, my breath catching in my chest. I hadn't imagined it. Someone with a key had just locked me in. Panic, pure and absolute, washed over me. I was trapped. I backed away from the door slowly, my eyes wide with terror. I looked around the room for a weapon, an escape. There was a heavy glass ashtray on the desk. I grabbed it. The only other way out was the window. It was one of those old horizontal sliding windows with a flimsy-looking latch. I rushed over to it, my hands trembling so hard that I could barely work the lock. It finally gave. I slid the window open. A gust of frigid night air hit my face. I looked out. There was a drop of about 4 feet to the ground. I could make it. I was about to climb out the window when I heard steps in the hallway outside my room. Slow, heavy steps. They stopped right in front of my door. I held my breath, clutching the ashtray so hard that my knuckles were white. A key slid into the lock. My lock. The doorknob began to turn. I didn't wait to see who it was. I scrambled through the window, not caring for the noise. I landed hard on the gravel below, twisting my ankle. A sharp pain shot up my leg, but adrenaline drowned it out. I pushed myself up and ran. I didn't look back. I half limped, half sprinted to my car, fumbling for the keys. I jammed the key into the ignition, my heart hammering against my ribs. The engine roared to life. I threw the car in reverse, tires screeching on the pavement, and peeled out of that parking lot without ever looking in the rearview mirror. I drove for what felt like an eternity, my foot pressed to the floor. About 30 miles down the road, my phone buzzed. I had service. I pulled over, my whole body shaking, and called 911. I told the dispatcher everything, the sounds, the voices, being locked in my room. They took the report seriously and said they would send a state trooper to check it out. They told me to wait at a 24-hour gas station in the next town over. I did. An hour later, an officer called me back. He told me they went to the Sleepy Hollow Inn. The old man at the desk claimed I was the only guest who had checked in all night. They checked room 7, my room. It was empty. the bed untouched, as if no one had ever been there. They insisted on checking room 8. The clerk reluctantly opened it for them. The officer told me the room was completely empty. No furniture, just bare floors, dust, and a single dark stain on the drywall of the shared wall. When they pressed him, the old clerk eventually admitted they were slowly renovating the rooms, and that one had been stripped for weeks. There was no one else there. The officer sounded like he thought I'd had a nightmare or was on something. He told me to get some coffee and be safe on the road. I knew what I heard. I wasn't crazy. I never went to the police about it again. I just wanted to forget. But a few months later, morbid curiosity got the better of me. I looked up the Sleepy Hollow Inn online. I found a local news article from a year before my stay. A woman, a traveler, just passing through, had gone missing. Her car was found abandoned in the motel's parking lot. She was never seen again. That's when I realized the truth. The sounds I heard, the scraping, the pleading, it wasn't a guest in the next room. The room was empty, yes, but the space between the walls wasn't. They didn't lock me in my room to hurt me. They locked me in so I couldn't get out while they dealt with their other problem. And when they were done, my room was next. I wasn't just a guest. I was a reservation.
My wife, Amelia, and I have a tradition. For our anniversary, we find a grand, historic hotel somewhere and spend a weekend living in luxury. For our 10th, we decided to go all out. We booked a corner suite at the Majestic, a hotel built in the 1920s, famous for its opulent architecture and, as we would later find out, its long and storied history. From the moment we walked into the lobby, it was like stepping back in time. Towering marble columns, crystal chandeliers, and a hushed, reverent atmosphere. Our room was on the 7th floor, room 713. It was beautiful. A huge 4-poster bed, antique furniture, and a massive window overlooking the city. It felt perfect. The first odd thing happened that evening. We were getting ready for our dinner reservation. I was in the bathroom, and Amelia was in the main room. I heard her say, "No, I think I'll wear the blue one." I poked my head out. "Sorry, what did you say?" She looked up from her suitcase, confused. "I didn't say anything." "I thought I heard you talking," I said. "It sounded like you were right next to me." She just shrugged, a little weirded out, and we both dismissed it. A trick of the acoustics in an old building. Dinner was wonderful. We came back to the room late, feeling happy and romantic. We fell asleep pretty quickly. Around 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly. The room was ice cold. So cold I could see my breath in the dim light filtering through the window. I sat up, shivering, and saw that the heavy velvet curtains, which we had drawn shut, were now wide open. The window was slightly ajar, letting in the freezing night air. I got up and shut it, my teeth chattering. I figured Amelia must have gotten hot and opened it, though that seemed unlikely given the temperature. I climbed back into bed. She was fast asleep, curled under the blankets. As I lay there, trying to warm up, I heard a faint sound. It was the soft, melancholic sound of a piano playing. It was distant, like it was coming from down the hall, but it was beautiful. I figured it was a recording playing in the hotel's lounge or something. I eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, at breakfast, I mentioned the piano music to Amelia. Her face went pale. "Mark, I heard it too, but it didn't sound like it was coming from down the hall. It sounded like it was coming from inside our room." Now we were both unsettled. Later that day, while Amelia was at the hotel spa, I decided to do a little digging. I'm a bit of a history buff, so I went down to the hotel's library and started looking through some books on its past. It didn't take long to find a chapter on the hotel's more infamous events. And there it was, room 713. In 1931, a young actress named Eleanor Vance had taken her own life in our exact suite. She was a gifted pianist, and on the night she died, guests reported hearing her play a sad, beautiful melody on the piano in her room for hours. She was found the next morning, having jumped from the room's large window. The story gave me chills. The woman's voice Amelia heard, the open window, the piano music, it was all starting to connect terrifyingly. I didn't tell Amelia. I didn't want to ruin our anniversary. I convinced myself it was just a string of coincidences, amplified by the power of suggestion after reading the story. That night, things escalated. We were watching a movie on my laptop when the screen suddenly went black. A second later, it flickered back on, but it wasn't the movie. It was an old black and white photograph of our room, room 713. But it was decorated differently, with furniture from a bygone era. Standing near the window was a woman in a 1930s-style dress. Her face was turned away, but I knew instantly who it had to be. Eleanor. The image only lasted for a few seconds before my laptop shut down completely and wouldn't turn back on. Amelia and I just sat there in silence, staring at the blank screen. "Did you see that?" she whispered. "I saw it," I said, my voice tight. We tried to rationalize it. A virus, a weird pop-up. But we both knew what we had seen. The atmosphere in the room had changed. It felt heavy, oppressive. The air was thick with a sweet floral scent, like old perfume. We decided to just go to sleep, to get the night over with and check out first thing in the morning. We left a lamp on, needing the comfort of the light. I lay in bed, my back to Amelia, pretending to be asleep, but my eyes were wide open, staring into the dim room. That's when I felt it, a dip in the mattress behind me, as if a third person had just sat down on the edge of the bed. I was paralyzed with fear. I could feel their weight, could almost feel a cold presence radiating next to me. I wanted to scream, to jump out of bed, but I couldn't move. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for it to go away. Then, I heard a whisper. It was a woman's voice, but it wasn't coming from the room. It was right next to my ear. It was so close, I could feel the cold breath on my skin. She whispered one single word. "Jump." That was it. I shot out of bed, grabbing Amelia's arm and pulling her with me. She woke up with a scream. "What is it? What's wrong?" I yelled, "We're leaving, now!" grabbing our jackets and wallets. We didn't pack, we just ran, out of the room, down the long, empty hallway, not even waiting for the elevator. We burst through the stairwell door and clambered down 7 flights of stairs. We didn't stop until we were in the lobby. The night manager looked at us, bewildered, as we, breathless and terrified, checked out at 3:30 in the morning. We drove for 2 hours before we finally stopped at a brightly lit diner to collect ourselves. We were shaken, but we felt safe. We had gotten away. We had left the ghost of Eleanor Vance behind in room 713. It was only a week later, back home, that we realized how wrong we were. Amelia was uploading photos from the trip to her computer. She called me into the office, her voice trembling. She pointed to a picture on the screen. It was a selfie we had taken in the grand mirror of the hotel lobby on our way out that first night, right after we checked in. We were smiling, happy, and excited for our weekend. But in the reflection, behind us, standing near the marble column, was a woman. She was faint, almost translucent, wearing a vintage dress. Her face was in shadow, but she was looking directly at the camera, directly at us. She wasn't in the room. She was in the hotel. And when we looked at that picture, we realized she had been with us from the very beginning. The worst part is the feeling that has lingered in our own house ever since. Now and then, late at night, I'll catch a faint scent of old perfume in the hallway. And sometimes, when the house is quiet, I can almost hear the distant, melancholic sound of a piano playing. She didn't stay in the hotel. She followed us home.
I travel for work a lot. Not the exciting kind of travel, but the boring corporate kind. Fly into a city, go to a conference in a soulless convention center, and stay at a generic airport hotel that looks identical to the one you stayed at last week. This particular trip was to Chicago, and I was staying at one of those places. a big 15-story block of concrete and glass called the Aviation Grand. I checked in late, around 11 p.m. I was tired, irritable, and just wanted to get some sleep before my 8 a.m. meeting. My room was on the 12th floor, number 1221. It was clean, sterile, and completely unremarkable. I dropped my bags, took a quick shower, and climbed into bed. At 12:47 a.m., the phone on the nightstand rang. The sound was jarring in the silent room. I groaned and picked it up, assuming it was the front desk or a wrong number. "Hello?" I mumbled. There was silence on the other end for a second. Then a man's voice, a desperate whisper. Is this Chloe?" "My name is Chloe." My blood went cold. How would a wrong number know my name? "Who is this?" I asked, sitting up. "You have to help me," the man whispered, his voice cracking with fear. "Please, he's going to come back. Don't hang up." "Who is he? Who is this? How did you get this number?" My questions tumbled out in a panicked rush. "There's no time," the man whispered. "He locked me in. I'm in the bathroom. Please, you have to get help." The line went dead. I sat there holding the receiver, my heart pounding. What just happened? Was this a prank? But it sounded so real. The fear in his voice. You can't fake that. I looked at the phone. It was a standard hotel phone. He must be calling from another room. I dialed 0 for the front desk. A cheerful-sounding woman answered. "Front desk, how can I help you?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "Hi, I just received a really strange call in my room. A man asking for help? It sounded like he was in trouble. Can you tell what room the call came from?" "One moment, ma'am." I heard typing. "I'm sorry, but our system doesn't show any internal calls made to your room tonight. All calls have been from outside lines." An outside line? How would someone from an outside line know my name and my room number? And why would they call me for help? "Are you sure? He said he was locked in a bathroom." "I'm very sorry, man, but there's no record of a call. Maybe it was a dream?" she offered, her tone now sounding a bit condescending. I hung up, feeling frustrated and a little foolish. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was half asleep and it was some bizarre, vivid dream. I tried to put it out of my mind and go back to sleep. At 1:30 a.m., the phone rang again. I snatched it up. "Hello?" It was him. His whispering was even more frantic now. "He's back. I can hear him. Oh God, Chloe, why didn't you get help?" "I tried," I whispered urgently. "I called the front desk and they said no one called me. Where are you? What room are you in?" "I don't know. I can't. Oh no." There was a loud bang on his end of the line, like someone was kicking a door. The man let out a terrified gasp, and then I heard a different voice, a deep, angry mumble. The line went dead again. Now I knew I wasn't dreaming. This was real. I threw on my shoes and ran out into the hallway. It was empty and silent, the long carpeted corridor stretching out under fluorescent lights. Which direction? Which room? I had no idea. I ran to the elevator and went straight down to the lobby. I found the same woman at the front desk. I explained what happened again, my voice shaking this time. I told her I heard a bang, that someone was in danger. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Ma'am, as I said, no calls have been made to your room. Perhaps you should speak with security." She called a security guard over, a big, tired-looking guy named Frank. I told him the whole story for a third time. To his credit, he seemed to take me more seriously. "You say he knew your name?" Frank asked, frowning. "Yes, Chloe. He said it both times." "Okay," he said, nodding. "Let's go take a walk down your hall, see if we hear anything." We went back up to the 12th floor. We walked the entire length of the hallway, stopping every few feet to listen. Nothing. It was dead quiet. "There's got to be a logical explanation," Frank said, trying to be reassuring. "Sometimes the phone lines in these old hotels get crossed. Maybe you got someone else's call." "But he knew my name." He didn't have an answer for that. He offered to stand in the hallway for a while, just in case. I went back into my room, leaving the door slightly ajar, feeling a small shred of safety knowing that he was out there.
I couldn't sleep. I just sat on the bed, staring at the phone, waiting for it to ring again. It never did. After about an hour, Frank knocked softly on my door. "All quiet, miss. I think it was a one-off prank. Try to get some sleep." He left, and I was alone again. The silence in the room was deafening. I was exhausted, but my mind was racing. Who was the man? Who was trying to hurt him? And why me? I must have eventually dozed off because I woke up a few hours later to the gray light of dawn filtering in. My neck was stiff. I had slept sitting up. I felt a sense of relief. I had survived the night. It was over. I got up and started getting ready for my meeting, the night's events feeling more and more like a strange dream in the light of day. I went into the bathroom to brush my teeth. As I stood at the sink, I felt a draft. It was coming from the ceiling. I looked up. There was a large, square ventilation grate directly above me. It was old and caked with dust. As I stared at it, I noticed something odd. One of the screws on the corner was loose, and the grate was hanging down just a fraction of an inch. And tucked into that small gap, glinting in the bathroom light, was a small piece of metal. My curiosity got the better of my fear. I stood on the edge of the bathtub to get a closer look. I reached up and carefully pulled it out. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a dog tag, like from a necklace. I turned it over in my trembling hand. There was an engraving on it. My heart stopped. It said, "Chloe." And then I heard it. A faint, almost inaudible sound coming from the vent. A man's voice, hoarse and weak, whispering, "He's always listening." I wasn't getting a call from another room. The man wasn't down the hall. He was in the vents. He had been in the walls of the hotel the whole time. The previous guest in my room, another Chloe, must have lost her necklace. He found it, and he waited. He was still there, right above my head, and whoever he was afraid of was with him. I never went to my meeting. I left my luggage, my laptop, everything. I just walked out of that hotel and never looked back.
2 summers ago, I was backpacking through Eastern Europe. It was the adventure of a lifetime. I was on a shoestring budget, staying in cheap hostels and guest houses. After a week in Prague, I decided to go off the beaten path and took a series of trains to a small, remote town in the mountains of Romania. The town wasn't in any guidebook, and it felt like a place forgotten by time. I arrived late in the evening. The only place to stay was a small, grim-looking hotel called the Pensiona Negura, or the Fog Pension. It was run by a stern, older woman who spoke no English. We communicated through gestures and a few words of broken German. She handed me a heavy, ornate iron key for my room on the 2nd floor. As she did, she pointed a long, bony finger at me, her expression deadly serious. She said something in Romanian, then pointed to the clock on the wall, and then to my door. Seeing my confusion, she grabbed a piece of paper and drew a simple picture. A clock with the hands pointing to 12, a door, and a big X through the door. I finally understood. Do not open the door after midnight. It was a strange rule, but I was too tired to question it. The town was old, probably full of superstitions. My room was sparse but clean. A single bed, a wooden wardrobe, and a window overlooking a foggy, cobblestone street. The door was thick, heavy wood, with a heavy-duty deadbolt and a chain lock. It seemed like overkill. I was exhausted from the journey and fell asleep around 10 p.m. I was awoken later by a sound. Knock, knock, knock. Soft, polite knocking on my door. I glanced at my watch. It was 12:15 a.m. The landlady's warning flashed in my mind. A chill went down my spine. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the quiet room. There was no answer, just more knocking, a little more insistent this time. Knock, knock, knock. I got out of bed and crept to the door, my heart starting to race.
I peered through the peephole. The hallway was dark and distorted through the old glass, but I could make out the figure of a woman standing there. She was wearing what looked like a simple, old-fashioned dress. I couldn't see her face. It was obscured by shadow. "Can I help you?" I asked through the door. She didn't answer. She just stood there. Then she began to sob. It was a heartbreaking sound, full of despair. She started speaking in Romanian, her voice choked with tears. It sounded like she was begging, pleading with me to open the door. My instincts told me to help her. She sounded like she was in genuine distress. But the landlady's warning, the drawing of the X on the door, it kept me rooted to the spot. I told her I was sorry, that I didn't understand, and that I couldn't open the door. Her crying stopped instantly. The silence was sudden and terrifying. I looked through the peephole again. She was still there, but she had lifted her head, and she was looking directly at the peephole, at me. I couldn't see her features clearly, but I could see the glint of her eyes in the darkness. And she was smiling, a wide, unnatural smile. I stumbled back from the door, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't a woman in distress. This was something else. I stayed away from the door, huddled on the far side of the bed for what felt like hours. Every creak of the old building made me jump. Finally, I heard her footsteps recede down the hall. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. I thought it was over. But about an hour later, the knocking started again. This time, it wasn't knocking. It was a frantic pounding. It sounded like someone was throwing their entire body against the door. The heavy wood shuddered in its frame. Then a voice called my name. "Alex! Alex, honey, open the door, it's Mom!" It was my mother's voice. It was her exact voice, her tone, her accent, everything. It was impossible. My mom was thousands of miles away in Ohio. But the sound was so perfect, so real, that for a split second, my homesick, terrified brain believed it. I actually took a step towards the door. "Alex, please, I'm scared. I don't know where I am. Just open the door." My logical mind screamed that it was a trick. It couldn't be her. But the emotional pull was overwhelming. It was using the voice of the one person in the world I trusted implicitly. The pounding continued, shaking the entire room. I curled up on the floor, my hands over my ears, yelling, "You're not my mother, go away!" until my throat was raw. The pounding and the voice continued for an eternity. And then, as the first rays of dawn began to light up the foggy window, it just stopped. I waited until the sun was fully up before I dared to approach the door. My hands were shaking as I undid the locks. I pulled the door open a crack and peered out. The hallway was empty. There was no one there. But on the floor, directly in front of my door, were long, deep scratches in the wooden floorboards, as if something with sharp claws had been dragging itself back and forth all night. I didn't even pack my bag properly. I just stuffed everything inside, threw some money on the bed, and ran. As I was hurrying down the stairs, I saw the landlady. She was mopping the hallway floor on the first floor. She looked up at me, saw my terror in her eyes, and gave me a slow, sad nod. She knew exactly what had happened. As I burst out into the foggy morning street, I glanced back at the hotel. In the window of the room next to mine, I saw a face. A young man, another backpacker I had seen briefly on the train yesterday. He was just standing there, his face as white as a sheet, staring out at me. His expression wasn't one of relief. It was one of pure, abject terror. And that's when the most horrifying thought of all hit me. The thing in the hallway, the thing that mimicked my mother's voice. It wasn't trying to get into my room. The locks on my door weren't to keep it out. They were to keep me in. It was a test, or a game. And the guest in the room next to me? He was still there. I didn't stick around to find out if he'd be checking out in the morning. I just ran, and I didn't stop until that town was a distant memory. I don't know what was in that hallway, but I know it's still there waiting for the next guest to check in after dark.
The next time you slide a key card into a hotel door, take a moment. Listen to the silence and wonder about the stories those four walls could tell. Wonder about the ones who checked in but never checked out. Which stories scared you the most? Comment below and subscribe for more true horror stories.